Catholics public. It's important to me to note that Joan of Arc lived in a time before there was a Protestant faith. So she couldn't really be a Unitarian because we didn't have it going on. I did a little research on St. Joan of Arc, and I will share that with you in a moment. First, I'm going to serenade you. You may already know this tune, and if you do, feel free to join in. Lady Godiva was a freedom rider. She didn't care if the whole world looked. Joan of Arc with the Lord to guide her. She was a sister who really cooked. And then there's Maud. Remember this from the 1970s television show, Maud? Okay. I was born in 1969, which means that I had the memory of a child. I have the memory, I had the experience of watching Maud on television with my mother, who was a single mother. My parents were divorced by the time I was 5. I don't remember the exact year of their divorce. I just know that there was arguing, and then Dad lived with my Aunt Helen, and I lived with my mom still, and my mom was a single mother, and my mother liked Maud. She thought that Maud was a pretty great show, and she thought that B. Arthur, who played Maud, had a really awesome way of bringing that character to life, and that what Maud stood for, women being able to express their opinions, to be bleeding heart liberal, as they called Maud, if they wanted to be empowered. My mother thought this was a good thing. She liked Maud, and I liked Maud. And I remember asking my mother, "Are you a feminist?" And she said, "Well, you know, I've never marched in a protest or burned a bra." She still wore one, even though it was the mid-1970s. She was old enough to have been born before women started to feel that was what they needed to do to be empowered to burn bras. But my mother explained that I came from a family of strong, empowered women, and we have this tradition. And I saw it as I grew older and became a teenager. And when I was involved with my first ex, I would say to him, "Your daughter should hang around my family. It's a shame that they're in Florida and we're in Chicago, because she could use some strong, empowered women to inspire her. My mother could do wonders for your daughter," I remember saying. My mother always said she wasn't worried about the girls that she raised. Boys were another matter. Because this kind of being strong and empowered was natural to my mom. She had been a tomboy, and she liked that song, "Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better," because this is what she sang to her brother, who was a year older when they were little. And my uncle got used to his friend saying, "Is your sister going to follow us everywhere we go and do everything we do?" And he would say, "I can't stop her." "You want to try and stop her?" "Be my guest. Waste the whole day. She's going to do what she's going to do." Thanks, Mom. My sister Sally had the middle name of Joan. And I asked my mother once, "Did you give her Joan for a middle name after Joan of Arc?" And my mother said, "Well, I always liked Joan of Arc. I tried to give you guys names that were simple because people are going to stumble when they hit Wolfarth." So Sally's full name was Sally Joan Wolfarth, and of course we lost her in a car accident in 1993. But before she died, she lived quite a life. She only lived to 31. She was an athlete, she was in triathlons, she won windsurfing races. There was nothing, I thought, in the world that my sister wouldn't try her hand on. She wasn't afraid to jump out of a plane or tie a bungee cord to her foot. She, to me, was kind of crazy like that. But she evidently had inherited this spirit from my mother. And for her career, she chose to be a lawyer. In French, the word for lawyer is avocat, which comes from the same Latin root as our word advocate. and it's the word that means someone who stands up for the downtrodden, the poor, the common people. And this is what motivated my sister to become an attorney. She wanted to be a voice for those who needed someone to speak for them and be an advocate. So in the best tradition of Joan of Arc, she made a dent in what she saw as the systems of oppression. I mention all this because it kind of leads into why did I find Joan of Arc interesting in the first place. In the second place, the thing that interests me about Joan of Arc is that she was a mystic, that she had mystic experiences, that she was open to the universe communicating to her. Now I'm going to give you a little history that I stole from Wikipedia, and I have to keep this short, so it'll be the highlights. Joan of Arc, 1412 to 1431, nicknamed the Maid of Orleans, in French, La Pucelle d'Orléans. Pucelle, by the way, is the word for virgin. It was important at that time that if a woman was not married, she'd be pure. And so Joan, being someone experiencing mystic visions, could put her case forth as, I am an innocent farm girl. I do not know the ways of the world. Joan is considered a heroine of France and a Roman Catholic saint. She was born to Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle, a peasant family at Domremy in northeast France. They had 50 acres or so, which means that she was doing better, her family was doing better than I'm doing. So, they were middle-class peasants? I don't know, they had more than 40 acres and a mule. Joan said she received visions of the Archangel Michael, St. Margaret, and St. Catherine, instructing her to support Charles VII, who was the Crown Prince, or Dauphin of France, and recover the country from English domination late in the 100 Years' War. The uncrowned king, Charles VII, sent Joan to the siege of Orléans as part of a relief mission. This is Orleans in English, so New Orleans is named after that city. She gained prominence after the siege was lifted in only 9 days. Several additional swift victories led to Charles VII's coronation at the recaptured city of Rennes, or Reims, whatever, which is where French kings were crowned since 800 and something. So for many hundreds of years. And it was important that that city be recaptured from the English and the Burgundian allies of the English, just as it was important that Orléans be recaptured because they were important cities to the French country. This long-awaited event, the coronation of the Crown Prince, boosted French morale and paved the way for the final French victory, which incidentally would not happen for 22 more years. On the 23rd of May, 1430, Joan was captured at Compiègne by the Burgundian faction allied with the English, and was later handed over to the English and then put on trial by the pro-English Bishop of Beauvais, Pierre Cochon, on a variety of charges. After Cochon declared her guilty, she was burned at the stake on May 30th, 1431, dying at about 19 years of age. 25 years after her execution, an inquisitorial court authorized by Pope Calixtus III examined the trial, debunked the charges against her, announced her innocent, and declared her a martyr. Joan of Arc was beatified in 1909. It's a Catholic term, I think, meaning a person is a great soul. She was canonized or made a saint in 1920. She is one of the 9 secondary patron saints of France. Things that are important to me as I read about Joan's history. After her death, her mother was one of the chief campaigners for the reclamation of her good name. And for 25 years, her mother said, my daughter was innocent of the charges that were pressed against her. She was a good patriot. She was a good Christian. She was a pious, good person who felt compelled to lead our country in the direction that she knew in her heart God wanted. So this slander of our family name needs to be reversed. Her mother spoke up for her. Go, Joan's mom. Other things that stick out in the story of Joan of Arc are the circumstances. The country had been beaten horribly by the plague, the Black Death, and so many people had died. And they had been involved in this 100 Years' War since 1337. So many, many years of suffering. And there was this whole problem with the royal family. The previous king, the king who was ruling the French throne at the time of Joan's birth, was known as Charles the Mad, Charles VI, because he was known to be insane. He had, which today we would call mental illness. When Joan met the crown prince, he probably took her aside and said, you know that you're having these visions and saying that I must send you into battle leading an army to win back, territories that have been captured by the French and Burgundians, and supporting the English who want to take over the whole country. People must think you're mad. So she came to the royal court to meet the king, future king, the prince, at a time when the court was savvy to insane people, having been ruled by an insane ruler. And Charles the Mad, his whole reign was this big soap opera. It was very dramatic. There were multiple children, all of whom died by the time that the Crown Prince or Dauphin, young Charles, was 14. All of his older brothers, all 4 of them, had died. So by the time he was 14, when he assumed the title of Crown Prince, he was like the last one. And his dad, in addition to being insane and spending a lot of the country's money and alarming most of the court, had also been accused of cuckoldry, because it was said that the Mad King's brother might actually be the father of the crown prince, which would make him not really legitimate. It was said that the Queen Isabeau of Bavaria had perhaps cheated on her mad husband with her brother-in-law, so there was a whole Who Shot JR going on. There was a huge drama going on. And because the rulers of England originally came from Normandy, there was an actual claim that these people were cousins, and the English wanting to take over the French lands and getting in cahoots, if you will, with the Duke of Burgundy was kind of a natural progression. Here was a country whose rule was, at best, fragile. And this 14-year-old becoming the crown prince really didn't seem to be interested in fighting to win his nation back. His first official act was to conclude a peace treaty with Burgundy in 1419, but it ended badly, and then the war came back on. So at multiple times during the rule of Charles VII, he did try to make peace with the English and the Burgundians and stop the war and restore order and sanity to the nation. Maybe he was a pacifist. Maybe he believed that things could come to a peaceful resolution. And the person to stand up to him and say, but we have to fight to get back our lands from the English and the Burgundians, was this teenager from the province of Lorraine who had mystic visions. So some historians say that if things hadn't been in a pretty desperate state, and the whole crown being possibly lost because of the English and Burgundians winning the war, maybe Charles would never have allowed his courtiers to suggest that he could take Joan up on her offer and let her put on armor and lead his armies. But I am interested in Joan's perspective. She was known to have said, I would much rather be at home with my mom spinning wool on the farm than doing all these crazy things. But here I had these visions. And she said the first time that she was visited by the saints, Michael the Archangel and the two female saints, she was in her father's garden, and they told her, you have a role to play, and we're not going to let you off the hook. You're going to play this role. The world needs you. France needs you. You're going to go to the king, future king, and tell him, you are the one. And at that time, kings became kings by divine right. So she felt that in her vision, she was told, you have to reassure the crown prince that it's you, and the country needs to be reunited under your leadership. Okay. When it was obvious that there was no way to go back and just be a farm girl, she started to tell people, this is what I have to do. I have to go to the capital city, and I have to go to the royal court, and I have to meet, yes, I'm an uneducated peasant, I have to go meet the crown prince and tell him that you're going to be the ruler, and we're going to reunite France, and I need to lead your army. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you've had a mystic experience, you know that things can seem absolutely absurd, and then, remarkably, come to pass. You can be informed of wildest, craziest events that actually happen. You can find a new role to play in life that absolutely works out. How much Joan knew about mystics, I don't know. She was a pious Catholic, and she understood about saints. And I have to add that in those times, it was well known that the easiest way and the fastest way to become a saint was to be martyred. People became saints because they stood up for something, and often it was their Christian faith, and they were cut down in the prime of life. So could she have known that this would happen to her? Absolutely. You know, so many great writers, poets, playwrights, screenwriters, actors have devoted so much attention to the portrayal of Joan. And that's always a question that comes up. At what point did Joan say, I didn't really choose this life, this was given to me? At some point did she know that she would be made a martyr? And what's found is that there's a whole lot of historic record as to the actual events that happened. This is 24 pages from Wikipedia about the life of Joan of Arc. She is one of the most studied persons in history, if not the most, men or women. She is possibly the most widely researched, and it's because of things like the trial that was held, which was unfair. The retrial 25 years later by different authorities, by civil authorities in which she was found innocent. And incidentally, when the original trial occurred, it was like an inquisition, but it wasn't even held according to the rules of an inquisition. There were rules of conduct. She should have been in a prison guarded by nuns, but she wasn't. She was in a prison guarded by male soldiers of the army opposing the crown prince, now king.